I just want to take a minute because even though really want to go home right now, I'm obviously in the parking garage and obviously I would like to leave, but it's important to me to talk about this aspect of nursing and being a new nurse that is challenging and that is really like emotionally hard. And it's a mix of everything. It's a mix of being new and having and lacking skills, but it's also like just it's a bigger overarching issue than just the fact that I'm new. So what's happening is that we're not admitting a lot of people. So it's like, unless you're really, really sick, you're not going to be admitted. And if you're well enough, you're going home. So that leaves the sort of in-between people who are the chronic, very sick people. And that's basically all the patients right now. So that means your normal patient load is 5, and that hasn't changed. So you still have 5 people, but those 5 people are all these like very sick people that all have a lot of needs. So it was just a lot for me to handle. I was totally overwhelmed, and like 2 times I had to like go and catch my breath because I realized that I was like hyperventilating because I was panicked. Because you, as the nurse, you're responsible to get all of that stuff done in the course of your shift. You can't dump it all on the next person. Like, that's unacceptable. And when you realize that it's way more than you can do in the hours of the day, it's not a good feeling. And there were like several other nurses that like helped me over the course of the day, and so I did receive help, and I skipped my break. Like, I didn't take a break, and I left all my charting until the end, so I only just did all of the tasks that I had to do. I was just doing task after task after task, and it was still impossible for me to finish on time, and that was like me putting like my 100% tilt effort. And it makes me feel like, what am I doing? Like, why did I choose this? Sorry. Hey guys, so what you just saw was a clip of me after a particularly rough shift this past weekend, and I had originally like edited that whole clip, and I was gonna upload it as its own video. But afterwards I thought about it and I sort of held on to it for a while, and I decided that I said a lot of things in that clip that were really important to me in terms of explaining what it is that was wrong. And I was really upset about how my shift had gone because, 1, I'm a new nurse and I was overwhelmed as a new nurse, but 2, just the working conditions are really difficult in general, but also especially right now because of COVID-19. And I wanted to talk about that, but I was upset. So I was just like rattling off all of the reasons why it was upsetting for me. And I wanted to kind of sit down and talk about it in a more concrete way and really explain it in more detail, because I think that there's important things to be said, and there's actually like a good amount of research that shows why fixing the staffing ratios is important, and like why making working conditions for nursing is important for patient outcomes, for the mental health of the staff, for improving turnover rates, and for keeping nurses in the profession and not having nurses leave the profession immediately. And the list goes on and on. And so I really wanted to address those things. But I wasn't able to do that in the parking garage of my hospital right after my shift somehow. If you bear with me, I will try to give you the most kind of concise version of what I think. This is just my opinion. And I used a really, really interesting paper written last year from McGill about nursing staffing shortages. that I'm going to include in the description down below, that covers everything in a lot more detail. So you can go ahead and read that if you want a really detailed version, because I'm not going to be able to, it would take me like an hour and a half to talk about everything, probably more than that. And I also used an analysis of like staffing shortages. That was a 2019 analysis, and a couple of other things like nursing wage reviews across Canada, and like a couple of other studies as well. So I'm going to include everything that I used. So I've been in the library, figuratively speaking, obviously, since you can't go to the library right now, and I've been doing research, and I want to share some of the things that I have been digging up. So I heard in one of the press conferences, Mr. Legault talking about the state of nursing in Quebec and why we're having so many problems with nursing shortages. And he talked about some of the things that are very true, which is that we have a serious lack of nurses in Quebec. And he's explained that one of the problems is that we lack nursing students. We lack people going into the profession. There's a lot more to it than that, which gave a lot of information about Quebec, because Quebec has the highest number of vacancies, actually, vacant positions of nurses in Canada. And so there are a number of reasons, though, why that is. And they gave more reasons than just that there's not that many students studying. That is one of the reasons why, though. But there's also other reasons. One of those reasons being that we're losing nurses to placement agencies. And placement agencies, if you don't know, are private agencies in which nurses get placed in different places. So if you get hired by a placement agency, then you are going to be placed, like you could go to work at a hospital and then you could be at a different hospital the next week, or you could get like a 6-month placement temporarily at one hospital, and then you could end up in like a CLSC or a CHSLD, all sorts of different places, and you get sort of temporary assignments. And those are and can be attractive because the pay can be better and usually is better. And so we lose a lot of nurses from the public sector into these placement agencies, which are a part of the private sector. In addition to that, we also lose nurses to other areas of the private sector, like pharmaceuticals, because those areas also pay better. And so, as you can see, there is a bit of a theme related to wages, because the wage in Quebec is, it's the lowest. It's the lowest in Canada. And so while wages are not the most important thing, they are significant. Why is that happening? Why are we losing people to placement agencies and private sector? And why is there a lack of number of students choosing nursing? Well, I mean, the working conditions comes up as in the articles that have been reading, and I'm going to cite everything that I'm mentioning obviously down below. The working conditions comes up as one of the most important themes over and over again. So number one, a cycle of understaffing. So bad working conditions are related to understaffing directly. So basically that we fail to staff a floor, or fail to have adequate staffing for a floor, which means that the floor is difficult. It's hard to work there. Your job is difficult. And then you have a high turnover. And then you have further staffing issues because people don't want to work there. It kind of just goes round and around in a circle like that. Band-aid solutions is another issue. So resolving problems with understaffing issues, resolving those understaffing issues with Band-Aid solutions. So those Band-Aid solutions being using existing staff for overtime hours. Between 76.6% and 83% of Quebec and Ontario nurses work an average of 2 hours of overtime a week, and about 5% work at least 10 hours of overtime a week. And there's many nurses who work more than that, of course, and less, but that's just the averages. And then, of course, the other Band-Aid solution is the one we mentioned before, which is placement agencies. So instead of resolving a staffing problem, they just sort of plug a nurse in from a placement agency temporarily. And in the critical analysis article that I mentioned earlier, they said that this is a major problem because it just sort of like temporarily resolves a problem on a unit with somebody who's not going to be staying there, who's not going to be part of the team for a long period of time, who's just going to come in, sort of relieve the stress for a small period of time, and then who's going to be gone. And so it sort of like almost rigs the numbers in a way, because it then makes it seem as though there's no staffing issue on that unit, but really that person is not there to stay full time. So what this article is saying is that it is just a temporary solution that kind of makes it look like there's no staffing issue, but there is still a staffing issue. So obviously the cycle of understaffing using of Band-Aid solutions is that works into working conditions, because obviously if you're forced to work overtime, if there's staffing issues on your unit, that's part of bad working conditions. But in addition to that, poor ratios is one of the biggest things that is part of bad working conditions. In Canada, the average ratio is 1-4. The average Canadian ratio is 1-4. And that's on a general medicine unit. You know, for example, for my hospital, during the daytime, the ratio is 1-5. And I've sort of spoken to many friends about this, and that seems like it's the general consensus, although I have spoken to people that have had ratios that are higher, like 1-6 or 1-7. And friends who will work partnered with an LPN will have ratios as high as like 1-13. So I would say that it is probably higher than 1-4 in Quebec. Although I looked all over the place to get like the exact ratio here to see if there was any statistics about the exact ratio that's in Montreal or Quebec, and I couldn't find it. So if anyone has that information, I would be really interested to see it. But I would very much guess, just by the people that I've spoken to about the ratios in their hospitals, that it is well above 1-4. And so I think, and I believe that speaks a lot to what the working conditions are in your hospital. 43% of new nurses reported a high level of distress at their job, and 62% plan to quit that job as a result of that high level of distress, and 13% planned to leave the profession altogether. And this was a study done in Quebec in 2008. And so this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about not feeling that this is normal. I don't think that it's normal that 62% of new nurses want to quit their job, or that 13% want to leave the profession. I don't think that is just something that, oh, you're going to get over. Like, it's totally normal to feel that way in your new job. Like, I think that this has to do with our working conditions. And when you're starting a new job and you're starting it in poor working conditions, with poor staffing ratios and not amazing wages, it's difficult to keep people in the profession. And also it is difficult to get people to come into the profession. So, I mean, a lot of nurses, it's a family job. So the profession sort of runs in their family. So their mom will be a nurse, their sister will be a nurse. But I can't imagine that you would be too inspired to become a nurse if you see your mom come home every day in shambles from their position as a nurse, or you see them barely getting by
with their wages as a nurse, and they're working so hard, like especially with the amount of schooling that you do to become a nurse. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Working conditions and the wages are impacting the number of students that are interested in nursing in Quebec, because young people look at that. They care about what they're going to be making. They care about what their working conditions are going to be like when they graduate. And the wages in Quebec are not amazing. They're the lowest in Quebec. The median wage is $3 lower in Quebec than it is in the rest of the provinces, and that's as of 2019. According to PayScale, the wages in Montreal, Quebec, are the lowest in Canada by 22%. So I don't know, like, if you're looking at those things, I don't know what would drive you to come into the profession, other than just like a heart for people. Like, that is what drove me to want to come into the profession. But also, like, you have to want to come in, you have to come into it and then want to stay when the going gets tough. And right now it's really tough. So I want to take a second before I go to talk about who's doing it better, which is, you know, there's places like California, they have a fixed ratio of 1:4. Belgium, they also have fixed staffing ratios. Australia, they use a formula, and the formula roughly comes out to a patient ratio of 1:4. And what is the outcome? It's not surprising, because this is something that we know, that research shows us that that when we use a ratio of 1:4, or when we use fixed ratios, basically, not necessarily 1:4, because it depends on whether you're like in intensive care, ER, or whatever. But when we used fixed ratios, that the patient outcomes are better, that we have less adverse effects on the patients, that the staff are happier, and that there's less employee burnout, and that there are less, that like the list goes on and on of the things that are happening, but like less pressure ulcers, less repeat infections, less return to hospital. So when we discharge people, they're not coming back, which means that they're costing the healthcare system less money, which means that we're saving money, which means we can afford the staff. So like, it all comes out to being the same thing in the end, but it's like, we need to spend the money to save the money, kind of thing. So I get frustrated when I think about this, because there were so many similar things in social services, and I hate to see that my nursing colleagues at all the hospitals, it's not about the hospital that I work at all. It's just about nursing, the situation of nursing in Quebec in general, that they're tired, and that their nursing staffing ratios are high, and that their pay is low. It sucks, you know. I mean, that's not how nurses should be treated. And I do appreciate people appreciating healthcare workers. Like, that is really, really nice. But one of the things that we really need is to be heard, and to have our voices lifted up, and to be sort of supported in our plight for being able to have working conditions which allow us to care for patients better, and allow us to be cared for better. This is something that's important, and it's something that is an everybody problem. It's not just a nursing problem, because at the end of the day, when you're in the hospital, your loved one is in the hospital, your mom is in the hospital, the person who's caring for them is a nurse, and the amount of time that nurse has is directly related to how many patients that nurse has. And so many times I wish I had more time to just talk to my patients, and to just, you know, get to know them better, and to do little things for them to make them happy in their day. And I don't have time to do those little things, and I don't have time to chat with them, because I just have time to do the care that I have to do. And I think if we could make those changes, like, it would really, really change healthcare. So anyways, I hope everybody is doing well, and yeah, that's all.